I think Japanese company missed the Web2. We don't have any global IT company, right? Like maybe Google, X, Meta, and so on. And I think Web3 is the pretty new platform which empower the individual rather than nations or companies and so on. I think Japanese government made Web3 as a national strategy because of this background. So it makes sense for me to see a lot of the Japanese company work on Web3 seriously.
Hello, Sam. How are you doing?
Hello, Avery. Happy Gen Z Day. So nice to see you.
Best day of the week.
Best day of the week. Yeah, really true. It truly is. We've had some exciting conversations this past week, which we're not going to tell anyone about, but I'm just very excited for the future of Gen Z is all I'm going to say. Yeah, I'm excited. How was your weekend? What's this week looking like? Tell me everything.
It's a beautiful fall week. I am very pumped up about some of our recent conversations and the evolution and future of Gen Z hitting new formats potentially. So we'll leave that with our listeners in our community.
We are hoping.
We are hoping it's going to be an action-packed sprint to the end of the year. I feel like everyone, when we get into sort of fall, they start thinking about 2025 and next year. How are we going to do things differently in the future? But one thing that we always like to remind people is there's still 4 months left in 2024. There's plenty of time left to influence our outcomes. That's what I'm thinking about.
So true. We also we're coming up on episode 100, so some teasing about that. I think we should definitely do a little recap state of the state for Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
I also loved last year's prediction show. So I know we have 4 months, but start getting those predictions ready because I think 2025 is going to be a wild year across all of the different categories that we cover on this show. So with that, though, Avery, there were some interesting stories since the last time we were on. I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Yep.
The first one was the story around the sort of SocialFi network FriendTech shutting down. The devs sort of left the project, as it were. And, remember, there was this big moment where it seemed like there were celebrities and KOLs and musicians all getting on FriendTech, certain people, the keys to be able to chat with one of these stars. At one point, some of them were in the thousands of dollars. I think I had made about $200 for people for some reason wanting to chat with me on this. And I don't know, I remember you and I both being a little skeptical when FriendTech was launched, but there's a lot of hype around it. So now that it is defunct, any sort of thoughts, or do you want to just dance on the grave?
I'm not going to dance on the grave, but I remember when we talked about this when it sort of first popped onto the scene. And I think there are some commonalities with other platforms that we've seen similar to this. Many of our listeners will remember the era of Cameo as sort of a hot thing where you could get a celebrity to say, "Happy birthday, Sam. I think you're the best." And there was also an era of NFTs unlocking exclusive access and utility to celebrities. And I think FriendTech sort of followed along that same path. And it was hot until it was not. And I think the challenge with all of these things that I just sort of listed is they're not sustainable for the long term necessarily. We haven't seen an iteration that is long term sustainable and interesting and engaging for both users and then also for celebrities. I actually still think there's something to this idea of unlocking direct access and democratizing the ability to do so. It's clearly something people want, but we haven't really seen people be able to break past that initial hype into sustained momentum. So that will have to be for the next, company who tries to tackle this challenge.
Well, you make a good point because there's been some stories recently about even Cameo's valuation has really plummeted.
Yeah.
In the pandemic, it was very, very high, and people were sort of jazzed and using it as a way to connect with people. But recently, I think that the whole sort of primitive of direct connection seems to be a bit challenged. With that said, though, I think it was about a month ago, OnlyFans released their earnings, which were wild and very, very successful. Patreon is still out there kind of killing it. We had, Kajabi on the podcast, which is growing more and more tools for direct connection from creators to fans. So I think it's, I wonder if it's really about maybe that specific modal of access and the appreciation of value to access versus the idea of it's still a TikTok world, it's still an Instagram world, and people want to follow their creators on the platforms where they're also seeing their friends, where they're also seeing the brands that they love and getting their entertainment, which is such a key part these days of Instagram and TikTok. So I wonder if that's the problem, is there's just not enough other content on there?
There's enough content. I don't think there's necessarily a shortage of content. I think there's a not a clear way to be able to, because you could get lucky. Like you could DM, a celebrity and they see it and they respond. Like that actually still happens more than most people would think, where like you time it right, you get lucky, you have one good comment, and then Elon Musk, you're, in a Twitter back and forth with him, an X back and forth. That does happen. OnlyFans, I think, continues to be really popular with a certain type of creator. And that's, they're trying to expand past that. But right now it still is for that certain type of creator. And I think that the general thesis is right. Probably the execution of that, we remember back to Friend Tech, it was very hard to use for like normal people. It was sort of an early adopter type of a technology, and that was somewhat by design and somewhat, I think that, ultimately there were too many barriers for people to use it, which potentially is why the devs left the project, as you so aptly put it.
Yeah. I also wonder if this says anything in a more abstract way about Base, right? You have a lot of people who build on Base and think people get very excited about this. And Base is, I think,
people who use Base get excited about it.
True, but I'm saying, but I do think that there is something around Base not having a token. It really is just trying to be this like connective tissue layer, and I think it is kind of the way to consumer crypto if we can figure that out. Blackbird runs on Base, for example, but I do think, yeah, it's too niche to your point, and it does make me turn my skeptical eye, if you will, on Farcaster again when I saw what happened with Friend Tech, just because I wonder this sort of phantom $1.5 billion valuation they had about 6 months ago, right, where it feels like there's still not that user base. In the same way there's not that same user base for Nostr and a bunch of these other social networks. It's not just Farcaster. It's just the idea of a new social media platform truly breaking out and being powered by decentralization just seems still far away, which is like, unfortunately, like kind of sad. I feel like we should have been figuring this out by now, but we're gonna have to keep waiting. Maybe that'll be part of our 2025 predictions.
Maybe it will. I will definitely predict there will be more companies that try to launch in this space. Yes.
SocialFi will be there. And actually, to your point, it's so funny you mentioned the sliding into DMs. I don't know if you saw, but Mark Zuckerberg has a fashion line coming out, basically, or I don't know if it's like chains or gear or something. But I did hear from someone who knows the designer that Zuck literally slid into his DMs to say, "I love your stuff. I'd love to talk about a collaboration." And that's actually how that happened. So to Avery's point, keep your DMs open. You never know if Zuck's going to slide in.
You never know who's going to slide into your DMs. And, this is a real talk that like works for us all the time, is that's how often we'll do like seeding stuff. And yeah, a lot of times they don't respond, but once in a while they do. And that's a perfect case study.
Absolutely. All right, Avery, the next story I want to just get your opinion on, and we've touched on it multiple times here, but this idea that not only is everything a market and all culture is a market, but the idea these days that everything is a betting market, specifically, like will or will something not happen, it just continues to be this large thing that, at least within crypto, but also it seems like media is kind of obsessed with this, us as well, CoinDesk, I'm going to say. We just wrote an article when we're recording this. Yesterday was this sort of recent story around this guy hiding in the bushes at a Trump golf course. And, I know they're calling it an assassination attempt. Our story was the fact that this most recent attempt barely moved the prediction markets around Trump's odds for president. Just for context, everyone listening, there's almost $1 billion that has been staked on the outcome of this election on the betting markets, just on Polymarket alone, which is the biggest of them, right? So there's $1 billion, let's say roughly half in each way. So $500 million is going to go to someone depending on who wins the election. And these events like this often change the market, right? When something happens and people can see this publicly, there's an audience that will immediately go to betting markets to bet against it, back and forth. Last week, I had a very deep dive with a friend of ours on kind of how polymarket like arbitrage works, and it was truly fascinating how deep people are getting on the math side. But the fact is, right now, you can bet on almost anything. You can bet on what the #1 movie in America this weekend or this year is going to be. You can bet on what the next #1 song to chart is going to be. You can bet on the winner of any sporting event in a very unregulated market now. You can bet on who's going to win the presidency. So it just makes me just think about the fact that if every single thing becomes a betting market, also how many of those things become manipulatable by either the people involved, people who happen to hear or know, or just the fact that some crazy person could try to affect the outcome because it might actually affect their pockets so much. And I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on this idea of, is it a good or bad thing if everything is a betting market?
That's a complicated one, Sam. The reality is that everything is a betting market, and whether that's transparent, as you just talked about, like these numbers are, or not, the reality is that people bet on all different types of things. I think that the ability to bet on literally anything is only being like more and more transparently done. It used to be like bookies and like old school systems and like, baseball bat if you don't pay your debts. Now it's transitioned to these, digital first, transparent. You can bet on all of these different types of odds. Online gambling and online betting is legal in way more states than it used to. And, it's a little bit of I see both sides of the coin. One, I think a lot of states have done an incredible job with taking some of the, financial benefit of that and turning it into things that are good. But it is also a little bit scary when we think about things like election results potentially being influenced by this. Election results are influenced by so many different things, though. And like the topic of the last 2 elections has been how social media has skewed these things. So whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think we just need to recognize that it's a thing and act accordingly.
I agree. I think that there is so much variance here, though, and maybe elections are big enough that this could be something. I'm actually surprised, frankly, that U.S. regulators have not stepped in more. The poly market is not usable in the U.S., just to be clear for everybody, but there's a ton
But
of
people have
VPN.
VPNs and whatnot.
Exactly. There's a ton of access that are happening. It's not that hard to get on it. And the fact of, again, having $1 billion on the election, it's too attractive not to sway. But even the fact that today, for example, I was looking earlier, you can bet on which business quarter the new Sony PlayStation is going to come out. You can bet on whether or not Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are going to get engaged and when that's going to happen. And there is something where I could see someone who happens to be a low-level project manager at Sony being able to place a big bet, because they will know when this is going to happen. I could see a second assistant for Travis Kelce saying, "Oh, look, if I can make an extra $50,000 because I happen to know what he's planning because he asked me to get a ring." There's stuff there that just there is enough insider information in, again, a completely unregulated market that it just feels like we're still playing against the little guy, if you will, in a very dramatic way. So I think there's a lot of concern here. I wonder if you've seen any brands get involved, and only in the sense that one could see playing both sides of a cultural game in a fun way for a brand. Are you betting, what the new topping on the Whopper is going to be in 2025? As maybe it's a way to actually get the crowd involved and engaged, and you get to play that game. I don't know.
Sam, there are certain things that a lot of advertising principles sort of put in the do not play bucket. I would say smoking, illegal behavior, gambling, betting, profanity, blood. Those tend to go in the let's not play your bucket. But
Okay.
I like where you're going with it in terms of you can be creative and you can be fun. I think the way a lot of stewardship guidelines would look at that is like potentially endorsing gambling and betting.
Sure.
But I think there's a fun creativity comes from flexing those guidelines. So I actually think it's a great idea for one brand who maybe is allowed to play a little bit more there to
Challenger
go
brand,
experiment.
perhaps.
A challenger brand, exactly, who's open to playing in the areas that can be a little bit controversial.
All right. Well, we'll see if that happens. And if it does, we'll clearly talk about it on the show.
Yes.
Quick last question before we get to our guest is, have you played at all with the new OpenAI? I think it's their O1 model that just came out.
It fact checks itself, allegedly.
Exactly. Fact checking itself does more complex reasoning, and some have compared it now that it has the reasoning ability of a PhD student. But it did make me wonder if the idea that it's looking at its own information, but also takes a lot longer now, anywhere from 15 to like 30 seconds, but can be up to minutes for a very complex prompt. It also makes me wonder the amount of energy being used. Like, at what point are we just going to like go back to Google because it's quicker to get your result? Have you played with this model? Any insights yet? I admittedly have only read the reviews of it. I've not played with it specifically, but I just thought if you had any early thoughts, and then I'm sure we'll get to this at a later episode.
Early thoughts are it's very interesting and exciting. I'm looking at mine is still set to 4.0. So I don't think I have access to 0.1 quite yet. I pay for it, but maybe there's, it's probably rolling out, cascading out. So I have not played with it myself. It sounds very interesting. The fact checking ability sounds great. I'd love to see that in practice. I think the reality of a lot of these things is it's a hypothetical, yes, but we are still needing to do some fact checking ourselves at this state. And I think more broadly, OpenAI continues to iterate at a really fast pace. I mean, it wasn't too long ago on Gen C that we were just talking about the 4.0 model, and now there's 0.1. And with each of these advancements, I feel like we're seeing like real strides. Sometimes it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back in certain aspects, but it's just really impressive, the speed of the iteration.
Impressive or scary? We can play both sides of that
both.
coin. We have a guest coming on soon who I know has made a bunch of investments on the humanoid robotic side. And I actually really want to ask that person about this specific, because I do think that there is something really exciting coming around it. I will say, and I just checked as well, we were talking, I have access to the O1 model, and I asked ChatGPT how the O1 rollout is going, and self-referentially, it doesn't know that it rolled out its own new model. So maybe there's still some room to grow here at Gen C. We'll see how that goes. All right. So after the break, we are going to come back with Sota Watanabe. Sota is a very interesting guy who is the co-founder of Sonium, which is Sony's new blockchain. So Sony itself has been investing in their own blockchain around provenance and IP rights and a bunch of other things around commerce. So really excited to have a conversation with Sota. He's also the CEO of Startail Labs in Japan. So it seems like there's a lot of innovation happening in Japan with Sony on the brand side as it comes to the blockchain. We've had Vivendi, we've had some other folks on the media side who are looking into this. So we will, talk with Sota and sort of understand how they are looking at the blockchain benefiting Sony after the break.
Can't wait.
Hello, we are here with Sota Watanabe. Sota is the director of the Sony Blockchain Solutions Lab. And Sota, I'm really interested in this conversation, especially with what you guys are doing with Sony. But first, I thought it'd be great, just from your perspective, working in this day in, day out, if you could tell us what you think the biggest problem that blockchains solve, because I think brands need to hear it from people like yourself.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. And my name is Sota Watanabe, CEO at the Startail. And we launched Sonium, which is the public blockchain Ethereum layer 2 developed by Sony Group and the Startail. So I'm really excited to be here. Regarding your question, I think blockchain should be the technology to empower people. But the problem is blockchain and Web3 are the technology that empower rich people and tech people at this moment because of the lack of the distribution and lack of user-friendly service. So regarding the distribution, right now, less than 3% of the people are using Web3 and blockchain every day. This is a very small amount. And when it comes to internet, this situation right now is akin to the internet in 1999 or 2000s. It was Netscape versus IE era when it comes to internet browser. And the IE won. Internet Explorer 1 thanks to Microsoft distribution. Microsoft pre-installed Internet Explorer on their device, PC, laptop, and then people started using Internet Explorer, and a lot of the people started using internet through Microsoft PC. So for us, our strategy is similar. We partnered with Sony Group because Sony Group has very amazing, strong distribution channel, not only in entertainment, such as music, pictures, and so on, but also in gaming, finance, and even more. So what we do not have in industry is the distribution channel. I think technology is getting better and better. 3 or 4 years ago, the one transaction on Ethereum layer 1 takes $50, or even more. I still remember that age. But right now, transaction fee is getting cheaper and cheaper, even less than 1 cent sometime. So technology is getting mature and mature, but we don't have a distribution channel. So we would like to realize the world where people are using Web3 technology, just like internet of today. So this is the big concept we have under Sonium.
That's very exciting, Sota. So can you tell us a little bit more about Sonium and why a company like Sony needs its own blockchain?
Yeah, our vision is to realize open internet that transcends boundaries. There are a lot of the boundaries in a society, in a Web3 space, such as Web2 versus Web3, crypto versus real world asset, Web3 DGEM versus regulation, and so on. So what we want to do is to realize, well, everybody is using internet, Web3 without knowing Web3, just like internet. I think majority of the internet user does not know TCP/IP and how HTTP works, how Ethernet works. but they are using it because it's convenient. And the Web3 technology should be the same. The majority of the people does not need to understand what Sony is, what Ethereum is. People are using because it's convenient. So we would like to penetrate Web3 into our daily lives. And speaking about Sony, I'm CEO at the Starter Lab. So I'm also belonging to joint venture, but I'm speaking this from the outsider perspective.
Yes.
Just to be simple, right? Historically speaking, Japan used to be number one in multiple sectors such as electronic goods, car, and so on. But I think Japanese company missed the Web2. We don't have any global IT company, right? Like maybe Google, X, Meta, and so on. And I think Web3 is the pretty new platform which empower the individual rather than nations or companies and so on. Again, I'm speaking this from outsider perspective. I think Japanese government made Web3 as a national strategy because of this background. So it makes sense for me to see a lot of the Japanese company work on Web3 seriously.
But Soto, as your role as working with Sony specifically, I was looking at some of the documentation that you guys have put out about Sony, and it seems to mention a lot about the creator economy. It mentions a lot about kind of this emotional connection that people can have to brands. Sony is known so much for film, music, gaming, technology, devices, all of that. So I would love just your thoughts on what are the business cases? What are the business units that you think can make best use of a Sony based blockchain, and how is that going to help them do their business better?
Yeah, one thing we would like to focus is entertainment. Technology should empower people, and we are targeting the creators as the first step. So let's say, for example, it would be interesting if we could make a tokenized IP platform and to empower creators, empower artists. Right now, I think we have a lot of the things to improve in existing society, such as loyalty distribution problem, black box solutions, black box distribution, and so on. If we could make it happen on blockchain, and anyone can register IP, intellectual property on blockchain, and based on the usage of the intellectual property, the loyalty will be automatically distributed on chain, meaning transparent and verifiable. So it's gonna be win-win situation, not only for creator, but also for distributors and publisher. So I think blockchain technology should be used like this, empowering the individual, and especially we would like to empower creators. Yeah, and one thing I would like to say is the huge difference between Sonium and the existing project is that we start from customer pain point. We made a lot of the mistake. I joined the blockchain space back in 2016. We created a Asta network, and the Asta network is the important things for me. But through my career, I get a lot of the insights. A lot of the people, including me, started from technology. And then after making technology, people start to find the problem. This should be opposite. Starting from the problem and decide which tech to implement and how to solve. But the problem of the Web3 industry and the Web3 people like me is lack of the communication with ordinary users. So crypto people has been solving issue inside of the crypto ecosystem. So this is the reason why our industry right now is a little bit stagnating. It's kind of zero-sum game. We needed to make the pie bigger together. To do so, we needed to onboard ordinary people. We needed to solve existing problem. And that's why I'm intentionally speaking with a lot of the people outside of the Web3 right now, such as creators, artists, grandma, grandpa, and so on. Then understand the issue. After that, we're gonna implement solutions. And this is gonna be the long-term game rather than short-term game. So it takes time, but I believe we are on the right track.
Amazing. And Sota, you said some interesting things there about mainstream adoption and how you all are solving an existing problem. What do you see as those barriers to Sonium and Sony's blockchain being adopted by more users? And where do you think some of those users will be coming from? Do you think they'll be coming, your company is based in Japan. Do you think it'll be there? Or where do you think these users will be coming from?
Yeah, good question. One of our value is GM. GM stands for good morning in a crypto space, which represent underground culture of the Web3. I love it, by the way. I really love the underground culture of the Web3 because I'm Web3 native. But at the same time, Web3 needed to go mainstream. So after for Sonium, GM stands for good morning. But after Sonium, GM stands for go mainstream. And we would like to do it together with the community. When I say community, it's going to be the global community. And we announced Asta Evolution and Asta Layer 2 ZK we decided the transition from Asta ZK to Sonium. So we're going to integrate Asta ZK ecosystem to Sonium. And we have a Asta Evolution Phase 2, which is all about Asta Layer 1. And together with the Web3 native people and across the globe, Asta has really diverse and a lot of the community people across the globe. So together with the Web3 people, we would like to go mainstream together with the Web3 people. In first year, I think we're gonna focus on Web3 people because industry is still too small, and we would like to start from Web3 native people. But in the long run, we would like to onboard ordinary people through cutting edge technology such as account abstraction, maybe chain abstraction, shared RPC, or a lot of the implementation we are going to have. Maybe one of the things is maybe DID and so on.
So I'm interested. We had Ray Chan from 9gag. We had Yatsu as well very recently. There seems to be a lot of energy happening around Web3 in Asia. Sometimes it feels like more than we have here in America. Why do you think the Asian region is so excited? Why is Japan so excited about Web3? And sort of what do you think is the reason that in a market that's been a little bearish when it comes to some Web3 that Asia still seems to be like firing on all cylinders?
Right. Historically speaking, I'm a big fan of the history, by the way. Historically speaking, a lot of the seed technology was invented in the US, such as transistor, such as the engine, car, and aircraft, and so on. So I think I don't want to compare like US and the Asia and Europe because we are doing the global project. But if we compare, I think US is really good at making something from 0 to 1. And I think Asian country like Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, really good at commercialization, right? A lot of the seed tech was invented by US, but let's say car company, manufacturing company, semiconductor company are really good at commercialization in Asia. And these companies are leading the world right now. So I think Web3 entered the commercialization era from seed invention era. And that's why I think Web3 in Asia are very bullish. And another thing is probably regulation. US is already winning in a Web2, so they don't have a much incentive, in my opinion, to push Web3 forward. But let's say Japan, we don't have a many Web2 company, global Web2 companies. So I think government see this as an opportunity. And a lot of the, I think other Asian countries see Web3 as the same opportunity.
And Sota, I know right now you are attending Korea Blockchain Week. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about who's there, anything you're learning. Is it heavily people from Asian countries or is it worldwide, global?
To be honest, I see a lot of Asian people.
Well, it is in Korea, so.
Yeah, it's because it's Korea. Yeah, but a lot of the builders, rather than speculators, rather than investors, I also see a lot of the people from enterprises. I think enterprise adoption is making a lot of the progress in Asia, and I think our partnership with Sony is another example.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So final question for you. We have an audience that is really looking to build and I think build those bridges between Web 2, Web 3. We have Web 1 companies trying to see if this is an area for them. So if you can sort of tell us in the same way that maybe you spoke to Sony, what do you tell these legacy brands that are maybe hesitant about building blockchains or building on the blockchain? What's your message to them?
Good question. I think Web3 is inevitable, in my opinion. It's not the opinion from Sony Block Solution Lab. It's my personal opinion, but I think Web3 is inevitable. And in the future, I think people are going to use Web3 just like Internet of today. People do not need to understand underlying technology of the Web3, but they are actually using Web3 and are getting benefit from the technology. So this is something we would like to make. I think it is better to use Web3 wisely rather than ignoring the technology. We are still stagnating. I mean, industry is a little bit stagnating, but eventually I think technology is getting mature and mature, it's not an exponential growth, it's a linear growth. But people's expectation is pretty volatile and exponential. So once technology meet the people's expectation, I think a lot of the innovation will be born. And hopefully we would like to make an innovation together with multi-stakeholders, including a Web3 startup, a big company, and the government. I think right now Web3 became a commercialization phase, meaning we need an entrepreneur, we need an investor, we need a storyteller who are going to work with a lot of the stakeholders, including big companies, startup, government, and so on. Because what we want to make is the technology for people, right? Web3 is right now only for rich people and tech people, and we have to change it. Otherwise, people think Web3 as a toy. I don't want to do this because I really like Web3 technology and I believe the power of Web3 to empower people. But to empower people, we need to change the regulation. We need to deliver Web3 to ordinary people through distribution channel. So I think we are still early stage, but we should embrace the reality and we should take ownership. We should feel responsibility and we should deliver the product rather than speculation.
All right, Sota, thank you so much for your insights, for your time, for joining us, especially during the busy Korea Blockchain Week. It was great to hear from you about what you guys are doing with Sony and Sonium, and we will be watching this space very carefully. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sota. So Avery, it's interesting for me. Soto is the CEO of a company called Startail, also is the director of the blockchain initiative at Sony. It sounds like they're still really building and figuring out what they're making. We didn't hear that much of, which is probably no fault to what they're building yet. It's probably just early. But, when I think of Sony, I think of the Spider-Man movies, or I think of all the music that they're involved with. And sort of it's not yet clear in like a Blackbird style way how the blockchain helps the business layer be better. What we did hear was a lot of creator opportunity and how to create more connection, and I think their focus on a mass adoption model. I like that he was skeptical of the current state of Web3 because we need people to be skeptical because they want to push forward. But I think it was at least great to hear that Sony is so interested in building something.
Yeah, my take was Sota shared a little bit about like Japan's history and dominance in consumer electronics. And one thing that stood out to me in that conversation was he mentioned they sort of missed Web 2. And, he's one of the young Japanese people who's trying to change that for Web 3. I agree. I'm not so clear yet on exactly like why Sony is doing this and how, for example, is this integrated across their product suite? Does this help, with something like tracking or somehow improve the consumer electronics experience that we know and love today? Obviously, we have some Sony products in my household. So that part wasn't clear, but the part that was very clear was the passion and the commitment and the idea of, young Japanese leaders of wanting to continue Japan's dominance. And I also like that little joke he made about GM. Good money means good money to general market, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll definitely keep an eye out on what Soto and his team are building, and really how much sort of Sony is committed. I think that would be great to see when this starts to roll out within certain Sony product, whether that's hardware or that's software. That would be where we get to see it in action, which I think we need to just pay attention to that. With that said, Avery, always a great time. Hope everything is good on your end. We will see you next week.
See you next week, Gen Z.